And I'll put this up. So can everyone see my first slide? Okay, good. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Bailey. I teach at Tokai University in Kanagawa, and this is my partner, who's mucus-minded. He's David Hammett. He teaches at Hokkaido University of Education up in the north. We first met at OTJ, Online Teaching Japan, social event on Zoom, and discovered that we had, well, a shared interest in teaching the same book. And this is sort of how we eventually got to this point where we're co-presenting about sort of the same idea, but in two different contexts at two different universities. And so today's presentation, I'm going to be speaking for some time about the overall concept and then what I did at Tokai University with Microsoft Forms. And then David's going to take over and talk about what he did up in Hokkaido using Google Forms. And then we should have some time at the end for questions and answers, and also for any sort of hands-on application or practice that people want to do. So please hold your questions either into the chat or wait until we get towards the end. So I guess the teaching context for us is that at Tokai University, I had a vocabulary elective class that I could do anything I wanted to, and I wanted to use a certain book, but try to figure out how to use it in an online context, because most of us had to switch to that. David had a similar situation, as you can see from the details here, slightly more classes, but kind of the same idea in terms of levels, and only meeting once a week. The main idea of why we're talking about this is that online teaching takes a lot of time in terms of preparation and assessment, and the more complicated it is, the more time it takes. And so we were trying to come up with systems that were as easy as possible for teachers and students to use, was sort of our ultimate goal. So I guess I'm going to jump right to the book that we were going to use. That book that we did use is called Topic Talk by EFL Press. It has, each unit has a topic theme with 13 questions. There's an activity, which I'll show you in a minute, with a listening activity, and then a working with a partner activity. So it's in a way quite a simple book, but because of the content, it's really nice to expand it for different activities. And it works really well for sort of an elective communicative class that in our case only met once a week. There is a unit listening activity that comes with each one, and the audio and the transcript for that are available online. This is a quick screenshot or a photo of what a unit looks like. As you can see, in this case, unit 1 is about family. There's 13 questions that generally progress a little bit from easy to more difficult as the questions go on. In this case, as you can see on the first page, each question is given some multiple choice answers, and that's part of the listening activity that you can play the CD and the student listens, or the students listen and have to circle the answer. So this is usually something that we do in the classroom, but again, how do we make this into an out of classroom, and also other listening activities that you might do in the classroom. On the other page, this is the page that the students are supposed to use when they're working with partners. You have them mingle around the room and interview different people. And then from that data, you can do presentations, summaries, any type of activities. So let's jump into my class real quick. So at Tokai University, for this class, basically, we had an optional Zoom meeting, which was sort of a requirement for my university. I couldn't require students to come. And in the Zoom class, I tried to create sort of normal activities, call and response, students writing their own answers to help prepare them for speaking, breakout rooms with partners, dictation. And this was sort of fluid depending on how many students I had that showed up for the class. Other activities that were outside of the Zoom class, we did Flipgrid videos where the students had to record themselves. We had the Microsoft Forms online listening activity, which is what I'm going to expand on. The Google Forms quiz, which I used a form of David's material to supplement mine because his was similar but different. There were also Quizlet flashcards of the unit content for the students to study. And then the final exam was a multiple choice test based on the entirety of the contents. And in the 14-week semester, we covered 11 units. So for the Microsoft Form listening activity, what I wanted to do was create something where the students would listen to some a recording that was related to, but was, in my opinion, better than. The recording that comes with the book is fine, but it's almost too native. It's almost too natural. Sometimes it's too fast, or the answers are too minimal. And it's not a very sort of rich content listening activity. So I wanted to create something that supplemented this, but happened outside of the class. The students could do it. I could easily see that they did it and assess it as I wanted to assess it. That was my goal. So what I did for the audio recordings is my wife and I made recordings for each of the units, asking, answering the questions, trying to give good content. I used a Microsoft form to create a template. I'm going to show you this in a moment. That could be recycled and reused throughout the semester. And then we were using Microsoft Teams as the LMS for our class. So the students were able to access the assignment in Teams, go to the forms, do the work and complete it. And then I was able to access their work and grade it and assess it. And in my case, the grading was based on completion, not on any aspect of right or wrong. The students were asked to summarize what they heard from the answers as best they could. And again, I'll show you an example of what it looked like that the students had to work with. So this is a screenshot of what Microsoft Teams looks like if you're creating an assignment. So this is the Teams side of things. This isn't the Microsoft Form side. You give it a title, you put instructions where you can put in the audio files. In this case, I had the audio files available through Google Drive. I was able to use bilingual instructions because I had a multi-level class. And then I was able to add the Microsoft form. You can see here in the middle, this was the form link that the students would click on. Then there's the scheduling aspects down here, and then you click assign. And then it would appear in the student's Microsoft team. And I'll show that to you in a moment. This is another screenshot of what one of the online listening activities looked like for our students. It took us some time to figure out little aspects. Like at the beginning, I didn't have question number 1, or I asked them to write their name in English, because what I discovered is that Microsoft Teams only was using the student numbers. And so when I was accessing their assignments, all I could see was their numbers, not their names. And that made it more difficult to give sort of personalized feedback and also to deal with grading if I'm always trying to figure out who is this random looking string of numbers. So I added this question later. As you can see, question 2 was asking them to summarize the answer that they heard within the conversation, about the approximately 10-minute conversation. So if I remember correctly, David, this is where I switch to the more live aspect, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, all right. So let's quickly jump over to, oh, where did I do? I'm still screen sharing? Is that correct?
No, you're not.
I'm not? Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's one of those things, juggling so many buttons, it's hard to keep track. Let's do this. I realized because I wanted to turn off my notifications for Teams, I just shut down Teams. But in fact, I need Teams to show you the activity. So bear with me a moment while I reload Teams. I understand that not everyone has Microsoft Teams. So in some ways, while this could be useful to you, if you don't have Microsoft or Microsoft Teams, it's not. But David's, where he will be presenting, being Google Forms, is usable by sort of everyone in a variety of contexts. So in Microsoft Teams, I'm going to use an example class that I have. So this is what the class homepage would look like to me and the students. It's not that pretty because, again, this being a test class, some of the names of activities are just practice that I've been doing over the times. So this is an activity that I added, a recycled activity. This is what it would look like. The students would click on the assignment. This over here. So where my university internet is not its fastest, apparently. That awkward moment. Okay, I am connected. Come on, Microsoft, don't do this to me. Huh, One moment, let me go back to the general thing. Just click this again. And it's not appearing. Wow. Oh, nope, there it is, sorry. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the teacher's end of things. If I go over here, I can show the student view quickly, and this is what the student will see. And then when they go to click, they can hear, this is the audio files, and then they click on here. And then this is the form. And you can see that there are the, in this case, there's 14 questions. The first one being them putting their name in English. When they're finished, they hit submit. And then I access their answers in the Google Forms function, and then I'm able to assess it again based on completion. In terms of making an activity in Teams, it is quite simple. When you want to create an activity, you can either recycle. If you hit from existing, you can choose an assignment that is from a previous class that the list is not appearing on my computer, right? So this is one way where you can easily recycle. You also can create an assignment or a quiz. In this case, it would be an assignment from that would be a more traditional assignment, or in this case, you can make a quiz, but I was not making a quiz. I was using Microsoft Forms. And you can see here that I could access it this way. So the thing, we're not here to teach you how to do this, because obviously everyone has their own LMS. It's more the general idea about how to use the forms so that students, again, outside of class, are able to listen to the audio that you want, but also you create a system where you know that the students did it. Because if there isn't some sort of teeth to the assignment, then A, the students might not do it, and B, well, you don't know if they did it. That's kind of the goal here, because if you just ask them to go and listen to something outside of class, you don't really know if they're going to do it or not. And I think that's about it for my part of the Microsoft Teams. So I think I stopped sharing. So David, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now. Little tag team, there we go. Yeah, here we go. I'll just start the presentation, get this floating control out of the way. Here we go. Okay, we're in. Okay, yeah, so yeah, I'm teaching at Hokkaido University of Education up in the north, as Rich said. Yeah, so my classes were pretty similar. I was offering 40-minute Zoom classes. They were optional. The university told us not to require any synchronized kind of activities, so things where everyone has to be online at the same time. It's just difficult for a lot of students that may not have the internet or the devices necessary to do those kinds of things. They require a lot of bandwidth, and they were trying to mitigate that kind of scenario with many students online at the same time. So instead of those things, I provided more on-demand activities, things that they could access at any time throughout the week. I used the flashcards which Rich had made. So there were optional Q&A flashcards, which were actually based on the textbook questions. And I also included some example answers, basically providing them with the way to answer, and then with some blanks where they could enter in their own information, making an answer. We also had Flipgrid activities for their speaking activities. Using the Flipgrid application, I really recommend it. It's a beautiful application that they can download on smartphone, iPad. They can even use it on their computer if they need to with their webcam. So it's a very good app for speaking activities. Those Flipgrid activities were based on the last week's listening activities. So there was a little bit of progression from listening to building into more of speaking. So, going into production. Yeah, so the weekly forms activities, I actually had two. which I assigned every week. The first one was a more focused or controlled. It was based on the textbook questions. So they only listened to the MP3 audio, which is provided at EFL Press's website. You can go there now and download it if you want to. It's totally free to use. I guess they'd recommend that you also buy their textbook as well and that your students buy them as well. And then the other one I had was a more applied, it's a little more difficult. We recorded YouTube listening activities on my coworker and I. We recorded a conversation based on the same topic in the textbook. But we did not go through a question and answer format. It was more of just a casual conversation with a little bit of background knowledge to know that these are not native speakers listening to us. So we tried to make it a little more simple when we could think about it. Maybe talk just a little slower, maybe try not to use such big words. But we recorded that using Zoom. So we talked through Zoom, and I uploaded those videos onto YouTube after adding a little bit of background music to them using a production software on my iPad. And yeah, similar, we had a short semester. It was only 13 weeks. It was supposed to be 15, but because of all the slowdown with coronavirus, we had to start out a little late, and we only had 13 weeks to complete 15 weeks of material. All right, so yeah, just touching on the first activity, it was textbook listening. So it was based on the textbook. The audio recordings, I slowed down using a software on Mac to 85% tempo. Sorry, I put speed in here, but you wouldn't want to do speed. You'd want to do tempo, slow down the tempo a little bit. And they would answer multiple choice or checklist questions. So there might be more than one answer. Google Forms allows you to do checklist questions too. So these Google Forms were based on the audio recording question prompts. So they were asking these questions in order. They would actually say question 1, ask the question. And as Rich mentioned, the answers were not full of much context. The answers were quite short. So it was good to kind of build on that with our extra listening activities. Yeah, and these templates were created using Google Forms for the activities. I'll show that to you later. And these assignments were posted in Google Drive. You can upload all those Google Forms to a Google Drive if you like. Of course, if you have Google Classroom available at your school, I don't think that would be a necessary step for you. You'd be able to create those using Google Classroom. I didn't have access to that, so I used Google Drive to share these assignments with students. And yeah, so they listened to the audio recording, complete the quiz. These were based on performance. So there was, out of 13, how many they got correct. And I also used attendance. I used them for attendance. So if they completed them before the deadline each week, they got full attendance points for the class each week. All right. And here's just an example of one of these activities. So this is the textbook form. So the first activity I was telling you about, I just give them simple instructions up here. It says to please listen to Unit 1, Track 1, and answer the questions. And I provide the link here. So I provide the link to the audio right there. So they would just click on that. This is the creator format. So this is how it looks for the person who's making the forms. It looks a little differently. They would be able to have a hot link here that they could select to go right into that listening audio and MP3 format. And I had them fill out with their student ID, family name, last name, first name, and I had 6 classes. So I had them select their class from a drop-down menu. Okay, and here's just an example of what the questions would look like here. So we had question 1, which is, I wrote out question 1 because it's straight from the textbook. They can look at their textbook to see what the question is. And also in the audio, they will say the question 1, blah, 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 blah. Do you have any brothers or sisters? And they say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. And then question 2, you can see here. So the first one was a multiple choice, and you have the option of creating these checkbox questions. So which means, and I tell them in Japanese that there could be more than one answer, which means there is more than one answer. So just be careful there. And I go ahead and I can make an answer key. I can choose which are the correct answers. I can decide whether something is required or not. So whether they have to fill it out or not. If you select that something's required, they will not be able to submit the assignment without completing all those first. If they try, it'll let them know that you need to go back and fill out this fill out one of these entries or select an answer for one of the problems. So yeah, it's very useful resource for creating your activities. Okay, and then the second activity was a extra listening activity. So this one was based on, I already touched on it a bit. It was my coworker and I having a conversation. They were based on the textbook's topic and questions. Sometimes changed a little bit, but we tried to stick to the topic as much as possible. And these were also created using Google Forms, which I recycled. I just I used the same form, just renamed it. I duplicated it or copied it, and then I kept all the student information in there, and I just changed the questions and changed the answers. And these were all as well posted in Google Drive. I shared the link to the Google Drive with students, so they always had access to these folders with the assignments in them. And yeah, so students would watch these YouTube videos with a conversation between my coworker and I, and we had a conversation based on the topic. We tried to keep them to about 10 minutes or less, just so that it wouldn't be overbearing for students. And those were also based on performance. So you can see here on the left, again, this is the teacher side. I just give a quick explanation. So this week, David is asking Alicia about her family. Watch the video below and answer the questions. And they fill it out just like the other activity. So just with their information, select their class. And here's an example. Here's David with a beard. I tried that for a little while. So yeah, this was the Unit 1 extra listening. And the question formats were different because the questions are not exactly the same as the textbook. So they would have to listen for these answers throughout the conversation, but they were not so clearly outlined throughout the conversation. We just tried to have a normal conversation, like no number one, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we just had a conversation. Students tried to listen as carefully as they could and answer 10 questions based on our conversation using multiple choice or checklist or checkbox. Okay, so I guess I'll stop. I'm trying to think here. If I want to change over to...
We talked about, I think the next part now was you were going to show them a little bit about Google Forms.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just
but you'll need to share your screen again.
Stopping the share. Yeah, I'll go back in again.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, can everyone see that? Let's stretch this out here. Okay, so I just made an example of a Google Drive folder, which I would use to share the assignments with people. So with my students. So for example, here's an English 101. Maybe you took that class in college. So go ahead and open that and, have folders for homework. So I have a class materials folder, of course, syllabus might be in there, some things they should read before they take the class, and then have a homework folder. And I got week 1 in here. If you ever wanted to create your second week's homework, you could just start a new folder like that with a double click. And you could create a new folder for your second week of homework. So here's week 1. And here's the topic 1 family. Okay, so this is what it looks like for the teacher's side. So when you're creating the forms, it's going to look like this. You can create these entries here, and you can actually move them around too. So if you ever needed to move something around, it's very simple to do that. If you ever wanted to add a question, just go to the previous one where you want to add something, and you just press this plus to add a question. So you can type in, for example, how many brothers and sisters does David have? Okay, and here you can go ahead and type in your options. So, and you can also choose here, what kind of question do you want it to be? I always stuck to multiple choice for mine. So for example, David has 2 sisters. Okay. And, you can type in some other ones that might, what do you call those? That kind of try and make them choose the wrong answers. David has 2 brothers. Okay, And then you can make your answer key by selecting this, and you can choose what the correct answer should be. And over here, you can decide how many points you want the question to be worth. Of course, I always chose 1, but you can change that if you want to. For example, if your question has 2 correct answers, you could make that question worth 2 points if you like. Okay, so select done, and there's your question. You could label it if you want to, just put a 1 dot, and there's your multiple choice question. You can decide if you want it to be a required question or not. So they wouldn't be able to submit unless they finish this one now. But if you leave it like this, then they would be able to submit without answering it. And here you have some more options. You can actually shuffle the options here. So if you wanted to, you could make it so every student doesn't have the same options in the same order. So they could be shuffled up if you decide to. That might be good for doing quizzes for students or a test at the end of the semester. And up here, I had some different things. Like this one here is actually a different sort of option. This would be a title and description. So if you wanted to add one of these, you just want to select this one. And then you could create another title and description. This is useful to know if you're creating quizzes, because here's something I'll show, is that up here in settings.
David, we're getting really tight on time.
Okay, all right. So I guess I'll just show that one last thing that they can, where's the presentation part? You can shuffle the question order here.
Right.
Okay.
Can you show them briefly about how you see the students' answers?
Sure. Okay, so once a student takes your quiz, you can go to responses. It says here waiting for responses. If you have some students that finish it, you would be able to actually see a lot of feedback here based on how many correct they got. And you can actually export all of the student responses to a spreadsheet. And this is using Google Sheets. You could also export this to Microsoft Excel if you like. Okay, I guess I'll stop there then.
And one reason that's important to have the way where the students either enter their student number or their name is so that when you export your answers to the Google Sheets, you can then sort by student number or sort by answer. Because otherwise you'll have just basically random inputs and you won't know whose is whose.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Useful features. Yep. Okay.
All right. So that we tried to finish with enough time for some Q&A. So I think basically what it boils down to is that
distractors.
That Google Forms is more flexible in that anyone can use it in almost any system. Microsoft Forms and Microsoft Teams are obviously sort of restricted to that. So that's one sort of distinction to understand. The other thing is about how the students are going to answer. Are you going to have open-ended answers, as I did, like either open-ended or transcription or summary, or do you want to have multiple choice? Multiple choice questions, like in David's case, was very easy for grading. You can have auto grading, which saves you a lot of time. But at the same time, they're listening just for keywords. So it really depends on what's your purpose of the listening activity. What do you want the students to do? And, there's different types of listening. So you obviously have choices here. So I think that looks like we have about 14 minutes left. I wanted to open it up for any questions and answers.
Yeah, we did get 3 comments. One of them is just telling me what that was. The word was distractors. Yeah, thank you for that, Chris.
So any questions?
Yeah, we got, if you open up the chat, Rich, we got a question about Quizlet. Could we share more information about that? You'd be the one to ask.
Well, Quizlet is a free flashcard program that students can use. There's a free app that's excellent. There's lots of different study modes and games. It's very easy to make cards. You can use audio. You can use images. If you have a spreadsheet of information, like questions and answer spreadsheet, you can auto import into Quizlet and it'll automatically make content. So yeah, Quizlet's really great. I guess, David, go ahead and take the next question and I'll find the link to my Quizlet deck.
Yeah, I just heard from someone recently on our online teaching Japan group that they were saying you could actually just take a picture of the textbook page with the questions, and Quizlet, the software, can read those questions and put them right into their software, like, using the website or the application. I haven't tried that out myself, but I heard about that. So that's a really cool feature. You don't have, saves you on typing time. The other question is, yeah, feedback for a correct answer setting is important. Yeah, you can set it to immediate feedback, so students will be able to know, what answers they got correct right after completing the test. Which ones they got right, which ones they got wrong. You can also set it up so that students know what the correct answers were to the question that they missed. I had that turned on at the beginning of the semester because I thought it would be useful for students, but I wanted to mitigate any kind of cheating that might happen. One student will know what all the correct answers are and then share with other students. You just have to be aware of those kinds of things that can happen. So I ended up turning that feature off. But yeah, that's a good setting to know about. And then limitations using Flipgrid. Well, limitations. I mean, they should have a certain type of phone. So my coworker though, she uses an iPhone 5S, which I lent her, and she's able to use it fine. So that's a very old, that's from 2012
Yeah,
iPhone 5S.
Flipgrid has, I think, been one of the
Yeah.
go-to tools for a lot of teachers, especially with the online Teach in Japan community, as a way for students to be able to produce, video / audio in a way that sort of creates an opportunity for other students to view those videos and then respond to their classmates. But I'm sure there's presentations about Flipgrid. There's
Yeah.
also a lot of really good videos that explain Flipgrid, and somebody is agreeing with us in chat. I did put a link to to a Quizlet deck that I made that's supplemental to the material. And what's nice about Quizlet too is if you find content from other users, other teachers, you can copy it for free in general and then modify it, et cetera. It's sort of almost open source. There are some benefits to a paid teacher service subscription to Quizlet, but it's not necessary. But there are some perks that in my case, I think it's about $35 for the year. There's enough that makes it worth it for me.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, email addresses, sure. Yeah. Rich, you go. Well, you can just type them in.
That's our addresses. Sure.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah, we'll just type them up.
Yeah, sure.
And we love doing Zoom talk sessions. So if anybody wants to contact us later to talk in person, that's my email address there.
Okay, thank you, Gene, for sharing the Flipgrid information. Cool. So they can look at, anyone who's interested about Flipgrid, that might be a good link to check out. Yeah. All right. Do we have any more questions? We do have a little more time. We could also even, I don't know, open up a room, possibly. I don't know how that works with another presentation going on, though.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's sort of billed as a workshop, but I don't know if people want to, try to do these things by themselves in the time that we have.
Yeah.
We can help.
Yeah.
Or
oh, sure.
I have a question about the kind of results. I wonder, somebody was posting recently about starting a listening SIG, because I'm really struggling with how to use the data that I have from their quiz scores and things to give them specific feedback about listening, about what their weaknesses might be. I'm just wondering if you've tried to do that using these forms.
Yeah, I mean, a good way to start looking at those things is to look at what they got wrong. So using Google Forms, they actually do a lot of analytics for you. So you can actually see what questions were difficult for students. It's a very good feature available in Google Forms. Yeah, just when I went to that responses tab, if I had a bunch of responses, I would be able to see stuff like that, some analytics. That would be a good place to start for that kind of research, for sure. Yeah, good question, Julie.
I also know, Julie, I'm also planning on joining that listening SIG myself, because I'm really interested in listening. And I feel like it's one of those areas where, most of the classroom activities, that you take the class CD, you put it in the CD player or on the computer, everyone sits there and listens to it. And it's just like a very passive type of, the students can just check out and not actually do the activity in class. It's like a passive engagement. But this activity, I like the idea that I'm going to use this in the future for my face-to-face classes and push those type of time-consuming activities outside of the classroom. But it's a way where the students have to listen and they have to produce something from the listening. In this case, it's either clicking on the correct answer, or in my case, it's transcribing, typing as the best they can. Some of the downsides is that some students wrote very minimal answers, which maybe is a level of their skill. Some students wrote their own answers to the questions, like they misunderstood the explanations. They misunderstood the instructions.
Yeah.
Some students wrote their answers in Japanese, which I guess is better than nothing. But a lot of that is sort of, teaching, training them to do it in the right way.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Doesn't Microsoft Forms have the ability to decide what kind of input is allowed for students to enter? Because I know Google Forms, I can specify that it has to be alphabets, and also it has to be a certain amount of characters or words.
That's a very good question.
So that's a little fail-safe you can put in for Google Forms.
Yeah. I think
might be able to
Google Forms has definitely more fine-grained controls on the question construct. I feel like Microsoft Forms, it's more just a traditional sort of questionnaire thing. It's either like you type your answer or you click on the answer. But I actually didn't explore that option.
Yeah.
Any more questions or comments?
I guess I was wondering what brought up the question about Flipgrid earlier. And if you found a way to integrate Flipgrid anyway into Google Forms or Microsoft or anything like that. Or is that just used completely separate in your classroom?
It was a separate activity. It was one of the graded activities that I did in the class. But Flipgrid, there is a website that's associated, but the app is the real sweet spot for the students. And so it's very sort of, I guess you could say, sandboxed or compartmentalized. Now, I don't know, sometimes people with Moodle, there are a lot of plugins with Moodle. But oftentimes in this case, if we're talking about a third-party thing with Moodle, what that means is you can basically put the Flipgrid link into the Moodle such that when they click it, they go to Flipgrid, but I don't know that it has that kind of integration.
Right. For a project I'm doing, I'm gonna try to integrate it into Google Sites and try to make some kind of like interface for students to use, but we'll see how that goes. I might use Moodle as well. That might work.
One thing you could do in terms of making an assignment either in Teams or Google Classroom or your LMS is have the students, make selfie videos themselves on their phone, not using the Flipgrid app, and then upload it to whatever the system is, whether it's Google Drive or the LMS. Flipgrid is a nice package. It's well designed. It's got good UI. It's got little stickers. And so it's a nice, sweet product, but you only, as far as I can tell, can use it within their context. So if you want to use it in these other ways, you might have to use sort of a more clunkier workaround to get there.
Right, like you embedding it using iframes or something into like Google Sites or something might do it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking something you could do if you're saying integrating Google Forms or Microsoft Forms with Flipgrid, you could make a video on Flipgrid, and then they have to answer questions through Google Forms, and you could link the Google form in the Flipgrid description because you make descriptions for your videos. They would click, answer questions, and then also make a follow-up video on Flipgrid. That's just something I thought of, based on your question. I hadn't thought about doing that. That's a good idea. Something you could try. Yeah. You could
deliver the content because as the teacher, you can record a Flipgrid video that the students need to watch and respond to. You could make your video the media content that the students have to listen to and then do the activity in the LMS, the typing, whatever you want to call it. But then also they have to make their own reply video to your video. That's what I did when I used Flipgrid is I would record myself answering the 13 topic questions sort of in a dynamic, energetic way. They had to watch it and then make their own response video answering the same 13 questions, trying to generate the same energy that I did, but they basically never did.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I just ask everyone to switch on their microphones and just show their appreciation for Richard and David's presentation.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah.
It's kind of nervous. This is my first real Zoom. I've hosted many of these as a host, but sort of being the presenter is like, oh,
Mhm.